There is a strange kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It is the feeling of standing in a room full of people and quietly realizing you don't fully belong to any of them. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you might know this feeling well. You are too young to be a real Gen Zer and too old to be a true millennial. You remember the exact sound a modem made when it connected to the internet. And you also know how to edit a video on your phone before breakfast. You wrote letters by hand as a child, then spent your adult life answering emails at midnight. People keep trying to sort you into a box, and somehow none of the boxes fit. Here is what almost no one tells you. That feeling of being caught between two worlds is not a flaw in your personality. It is a real psychological fingerprint, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly where it comes from and why it might be your greatest hidden strength. To understand why this in-between feeling exists, we have to start with something psychologists call the cohort effect. The idea is simple, but it changes how you see yourself. The people you share a birth window with are not just a random group. You are all shaped by the same technology, the same economy, and the same cultural moment during the years when your brain was most flexible. This has nothing to do with astrology or star signs. It is about the environment that surrounded you while your identity was still forming. And for anyone born between 1976 and 1985, that environment was doing something almost no other generation experienced. It was splitting in half. Think about it. Your childhood was analog. You played outside until the streetlights came on. You memorized phone numbers because you had to. If you wanted to know something, you opened an encyclopedia or you simply did not find out. The world moved at the speed of paper and patience. But right as you were becoming a teenager or a young adult, the digital world arrived and rewired everything. The internet, mobile phones, email, social media. You did not grow up with these things, and you did not grow up without them. You grew up during the exact moment they were being born. You are, in a very literal sense, the last generation to remember the old world and the first generation to master the new one. This is where a fascinating psychological concept comes in, borrowed from anthropology. It is called liminality. A liminal space is a threshold, a doorway, the moment when you have left one room but have not yet entered the next. Picture standing in an airport at 3 a.m. You are not home, but you are not at your destination either. You are simply in between. That strange, slightly unreal feeling is liminality, and here is the important part. Human beings are not built to live in liminal spaces for very long. They are meant to be passed through, not lived in. But an entire generation grew up standing permanently in that doorway between the analog and digital worlds. When you feel like you don't quite belong to either side, your mind is not malfunctioning. It is accurately reporting where it actually lives, on the threshold. Now, most people hear this and assume it is bad news. It sounds like being stuck. But the psychology here takes a surprising turn, and this is where it gets interesting. Living on a threshold does something unusual to the brain. It builds a skill that researchers connect to cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility is your mind's ability to switch between different rules, contexts, and ways of thinking without getting stuck. And people who spend years translating between two very different systems tend to develop a lot of it. Here is what that looked like in real life for a Xennial. As a child, brain installed one entire operating system. A world of face-to-face conversation, handwritten notes, long silences, and slow information. Then, as a young adult, you had to install a second, completely different operating system on top of the first. Instant messages, digital tone, online identities, and information moving at the speed of light. You did not get to erase the first system. You had to run both at the same time, constantly translating between them. You know how to read a room in person and how to read the mood of a text message with no punctuation. You can sit comfortably in a quiet moment, and you can navigate a fast-scrolling feed. Most generations only ever learned one of these fluently. You were forced to become bilingual, and that is the metaphor that unlocks this entire experience. A Xennial is like a bilingual person, but instead of two languages, you speak two cultural worlds, analog and digital. Anyone who has grown up between two languages will tell you something familiar. There are moments when you don't feel fully at home in either one. You might speak both perfectly, yet still feel like a slight outsider in both communities. That is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is simply the cost of being able to move between worlds that other people can only live inside of one at a time. But there is another layer to this feeling, and it explains the quiet ache that sometimes comes with it. It involves nostalgia, and specifically a kind of nostalgia that has nowhere to land. Nostalgia is not just missing the past. Psychologically, it works like an anchor for your identity. It reminds you of who you were, which helps stabilize who you are now. For most people, the world of their childhood still exists in some recognizable form. They can go back and touch it. But for Xennials, the world you were born into has, in many ways, completely vanished. The corner video store, the busy signal, the feeling of being genuinely unreachable, the boredom that came before every screen was glowing. That entire texture of life did not just change, it disappeared. So when you feel a wave of longing for your childhood, it can feel strangely unanchored, because the place you are longing for no longer physically exists anywhere. You are homesick for a world, not just a time. And underneath all of this sits one of the most basic human needs there is, the need to belong. Psychologists consider the need to belong a fundamental drive, almost as powerful as the need for safety. Part of how we satisfy it is by being able to name our group. I am one of them. I am part of this. Labels, as much as we complain about them, actually do something useful. They tell us where we fit. This is why generational names became so popular in the first place. They offer a quick answer to the question, who are my people? But when every available label almost fits and none of them fully does, that basic need gets left slightly unmet. You hear people talk about their generation with easy confidence, and a small part of you thinks, that is close, but that is not quite me. Multiply that tiny moment across an entire lifetime, and you get that familiar low background hum of not belonging. So let's put the whole picture together, because each of these pieces has been building toward one conclusion. The cohort effect placed you at a rare fault line in history. Liminality explains why you live on a threshold instead of inside a room. Cognitive flexibility explains the unusual skill that threshold quietly gave you. Nostalgia explains the ache for a vanished world, and the need to belong explains why the missing label stings. None of these are disorders. None of them are personal failures. They are the completely logical result of being born at a very specific, very unusual moment. The feeling of not fitting in was never evidence that something is wrong with you. It has always been evidence of where and when you were standing. So here is the reframe worth holding on to. Not fitting into either world does not mean you belong to neither. It means you belong to both. The very thing that felt like exclusion is actually access. You are not standing outside two rooms locked out. You are standing in the one doorway that connects them, and almost no one else can hold that position. Xennials are, in a real sense, the last living bridge between the analog world and the digital one. You can explain a smartphone to your parents and explain patience to a teenager, often in the same afternoon. And you can actually use this. The next time you feel like the odd one out in a group, try seeing yourself as the translator in the room instead of the outsider. In a team split between older and younger colleagues, you are often the only person who genuinely understands both. That is not a small thing. That is a rare and quietly valuable role. When nostalgia hits and feels heavy, let it do its real job, which is to remind you that you carry a version of the world that deserves to be remembered and passed on, not just missed in silence. So here is a question to sit with. What if the feeling of not belonging anywhere was never a wall, but a bridge you have been standing on the whole time? If any of this felt a little too familiar, take a second to notice that recognition. That quiet click of being understood is worth more than any label. And if this gave you a new way to see yourself, consider staying around, because understanding your own mind is a conversation worth continuing.